Meet Your Maker is a weird and often satisfying combination of genres. It's a building and management game. It's also a first-person shooter with a mixture of ranged and melee weaponry and abilities. But at its core, it's a puzzle game, a scenario in which players are tasked with breaking into elaborate trap-filled constructions in an effort to retrieve valuable loot, while also defending their own resources by creating their own structures with the intent to kill players as much as possible. In a war-torn post-apocalyptic future, humanity thrives through genetic augmentation and experimentation, and to do so it requires genetic material in order to prosper. As the lackey of a chimera that seeks to save humanity through genetic augmentation, your job is to find some of that sweet genetic material, or genmat as the kids call it, and also keep it. The game operates in two distinct formats: a first-person combat game that relies on players zipping around on a grappling hook, slicing enemies with swords, and using their bolt gun with a limited amount of ammunition, all with the intent to break into enemy bases and steal the genmat. Meanwhile, the other half of the game is a base building exercise. You see, every base that you enter is one that has been designed by another player. There's no procedural generation happening, the entire game is reliant on user-generated content. Each base is designed to carry a myriad of traps ranging from spikes to bolts, energy weapons, lava cubes, and even enemy NPCs. As a designer, you have a limited amount of resource available at your disposal for a given base. How many tiles you can place in the 3D environment is ultimately limited, so you have to choose them wisely. Almost all traps trigger automatically when the player enters some range of proximity, though with additional perks that need to be unlocked through gameplay and the expenditure of resource can customize a trap so that its sensor range is larger, or will trigger as the player attempts to escape after retrieving the genmat, thus transforming a base into a two-wave process. Getting in is difficult, getting out might be impossible. That said, there are hard rules on whether a base is deemed valid or not. A contrivance of the narrative dictates that a robot worker that is harvesting the genmat for the base's creator must have a clear path to the goal. There has to be a simple, flat path. It can vary in inclination, but outside of that it can't have gaps or require any jumps and the like. This is, by the developer's own admission, the sole mechanism that dictates not only whether a valid path exists, but also helps to determine the perceived difficulty of the base, given it assesses the number of traps and enemies that the robot needs to pass in order to reach the genmat. The perceived difficulty will then influence where it appears in an invading player's match selection screen. The game does have a bit more depth than this, given the genmat you can acquire can come in different forms, ultimately meaning different types of currencies for use in leveling up specific aspects of your setup. Be it your character outfits, the weapons they use, the additional gadgets, the traps you can deploy, the NPCs you can spawn, and much more. While you acquire genmat by stealing it from a base, you can not only harvest base materials from your own bases you craft, but you also steal smaller amounts of resource from players who attempt your base and die. The more bases you attack, as well as the more players that attack your own bases, then the more you can level up and improve your attack and defense capabilities. While the core of the game is quite satisfying, it got me thinking as to the longevity of it all. It's designed as an online game with reward systems that encourage daily engagement, and a big reason for that is the game is heavily reliant on the content generated by its community. Players need to be continually building and refining their bases such that they're available for other players to invade. Meanwhile, you need a healthy dose of players logging in on a daily basis to try their hand at all of these new fortresses you're building. It's all balanced on a bit of a knife edge, and provided players are continuing to log in and do their thing, then there will always be new stuff to check out and engage with. And to the credit of the community, it has continued to make a weird variety of stuff that is fun, anarchic, chaotic, silly, smart, or so frustrating I've been close to pulling my hair out. What has been interesting to observe is that already the community has begun to invest in specific tactics. Particular genres of bases have begun to emerge fairly frequently, or they employ a specific dynamic that enables for a particular end result. The core thread through all of this is they rely on how scoring works for the bases. As mentioned already, there is a hard requirement that the robot from the starting point be able to reach the resource pod at the deepest part of the base on foot, without any issue, assuming traps don't activate. The scoring of a base is, in large parts, influenced by this perceived threat of the path the robot takes, so you can exploit this to your advantage. Many players design kill boxes, where in theory it's a large pit in the ground that the robot walks into and then quickly walks out. But it's surrounded by enemy NPCs that surround the genetic material. By placing them carefully, you can create what are on paper easy bases, but are often chaotic first-person combat puzzles. This, alongside some even more chaotic base designs, has raised questions in the community about how the difficulty should be calculated, and in some cases players are creating bases that on paper look simple but are actually difficult to beat. Perhaps critically, what I would argue is a valid criticism is that a creator doesn't have to prove you can beat a base before it gets published into matchmaking. Rather, it simply needs to satisfy base criteria of gen mat reachability and a minimum number of traps. The developers have argued that forcing players to prove a base is beatable would create skill ceilings, given players that are not as good at the attacking game mode would suffer because they would struggle to beat their own bases. I mean, it's a fair point, but a middle ground needs to be achieved in order to address the way people exploit this feature. Meanwhile, it's also funny to see how the devs are having to react to community tactics. One idea I employed after seeing another player do it was to actually create two paths to the gen mat. The main one at the front door to lure in players, and a shorter trap-free secondary path that the robot would prioritise. To then hide the existence of this second path, I deliberately set a trap at the start of the level that would kill the robot on start. So if you're smart and exploring the exterior of the base, you could find the second entrance. Though in my case I deliberately created several NPCs that rush the entrance, so the player is immediately more concerned about enemies attacking them at the start of the round, rather than examining the building's exterior. Sadly, the developers have since patched the game to prevent you from using this exploit, meaning I need to log in and fix that base at some point and find another way to kill the damn robot. And this brings me to where I currently am with the game. While I've enjoyed my roughly 50 to 20 hours spent in it so far, I'm struggling to find a reason to continue. After a sufficient amount of time, you will accrue enough resources to unlock enough to enable you to maximize a given playstyle, either as a defender or builder. The endgame is kind of non-existent and struggles to give much reason to continue to log in and keep on top of your active tasks. Critically, it's worth mentioning that each base you build will eventually deactivate once the resources it is currently mining are depleted. This leads to one of three outcomes. You can reactivate the base by spending one of your upgrade currencies, you can prestige the base provided it has either killed a sufficient number of players, meaning it will be able to harvest even more material and have an increased resource cap should you wish to make edits, or it will just simply stay inactive. Players can't play it anymore, and you don't accrue any more material. Sure, this is meant to lure me back in, but I find it's doing the opposite. Given while some bases have been rather successful, others have received next to no playtime, and therefore I'm wondering whether it's even worth my time reinvesting in the base if the matchmaking is not going to lure players towards it. Provided the game can survive long enough, I can see it becoming an interesting long-term investment that you log into every few weeks to see what has changed, but that relies on an ever-expanding suite of tools and features, which is a recurring problem for most live service games these days, and players being willing to stick it out. Personally, I would love to see it succeed in that regard, but I am conscious that it may well die off in the opening year as player interest wanes. However, my issues and concerns with the long term aside, I have had a lot of fun playing this game, and spent more time chuckling at players' evil base designs than anything else. When it clicks, Meet Your Maker successfully creates that just one more feeling. When I fail again at an invasion, I'm often quick to hit retry, or even with a successful escape, I'm keen to quickly jump in another. On the other side, I won't lie in that sometimes it's just fun to log into your base to see where people have died, given you can even watch the replays of other players. It has led to a pretty evil smile on my face on more than one occasion. And that's it for this video. Thanks for listening to me ramble on about Meet Your Maker. If you have tried the game out yourself, let me know your thoughts, and if not, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it's maybe going to help you decide whether you want to check it out. And with that, I'm going to log off for now. Stay safe, kids, have fun, and I'll be back.